Christmas is all about decorating, and one of the best ways to welcome everybody to your home over the festive season is with a Christmas wreath. And I'm going to show you, using some foraged, garden gathered goodies, how to create your own decoration. It's not difficult. With a few tips, you're going to create something utterly beautiful. And we're going to start off using a wire wreath frame and a reel of wire and some damp sphagnum moss. The reason we use moss is because it's got a moisture content that will help to sustain the plant material as we're creating our wreath. And you can of course use alternatives such as wood wool or straw or hay, but the moss is brilliant because it has a lovely moisture content. So I'm binding it onto my frame using my reel of wire, and you don't need to bind it madly, but take several nice tufts of moss, form them in your hand into a little nice clump, quite firm, hold it against your frame and then bind it into position using the wire. So you continue binding on and you will end up with a lovely mossy frame that looks just like this. And then you just take your scissors and give it a little tidy snip, just to make sure it all looks good and gorgeous before we now add our foliage, which is exactly the same principle of binding it on, working around the ring. So we cast on again with our wire, a couple of twists round, and you'll see that's nice and secure. And then it's choosing your foliage, and you will know what you will have in your garden. And it's the joy of this time of the year is there's lots of lovely evergreens. If you're buying a Christmas tree and you need to remove a few of the lower branches, these are perfect to add in. And then things like any of the evergreens that you can find, some lovely junipers, conifers, some fantastic holly. Just be aware the berries and a lot of the sap of this is quite toxic, so if you wish, wear some protective gloves. If you're working with children, just be aware that they need to keep their hands clean and away from their face. So we take a little handful of mixed foliage and hold it onto the outside edge of the frame, and then you bind it. A couple of twists are all that's needed. 2 twists, and you'll see it's right on the edge of the frame. So that means as you look at your wreath, if you're opening and closing the door, at the sides are going to be nice and fully covered. So our next handful of foliage goes on the inside edge. And don't worry if some of your greenery is too tall, just trim it down, because what you really want is some handspan sized pieces of foliage. And then our third piece goes on into the centre, which fills in the gap. And again, with our wire, a couple of twists to hold that into place. Very soon you start to lose your frame and get this wonderful ring of gorgeous greenery, and then we just continue all the way around. You will end up with something that looks a bit like this, a gorgeous feast of foliage. And now the fun starts, because we're going to add all the adornments. So we start off using an assortment of different things, and I like to always use things like pine cones, seed pods, anything that's natural. We want to hold the pine cone in your hand with a pointy bit towards your palm, and then you just use your thumb just to open out those little teeth, and you just work your wire into and around, pulling it quite tightly, and then give it a little twist. And you will see that that's really firmly mounted. I like to get all my pine cones prepared beforehand and then add them to my wreath. So I'm starting off with these lovely pine cones. So you insert it to the front of the wreath, pushing the wire through so that it comes out onto the reverse of the frame. And then you just do a big stitch that just pushes the wire back in on itself, and that stops you having lots of pointy, scratchy wires if this is on the surface of your door. And we just carry on adding lots of pine cones. Now, top tip, if you want to be a little bit cheaty and put a handful of anything in one go, say lightish things, take 2 or 3 pine cones that you've pre-wired, twist them together so that they're in one lump, then snip off those wires and mount them onto one more. Give that a little twist, and then bend those other wires back up on themselves. And look, I'm adding 3 for the price of 1. So the pine cones are in, and it looks great. I love the different sizes and shapes. But now I thought we'd add something that gives it a little gorgeous garden vibe. And there's a really clever, easy way to wire them. They're quite weighty, so a heavyweight wire like we've been using is dead easy because there's a drainage hole in the bottom, and you just bring your wire up along the side of the pot, give it a twist, and there it is, good to go. And it's at this point you need to decide the orientation of your wreath. So have a little stand back, take a look if you've got a friend to help hold it up. I think I found my top. So what I am going to do is just bend the top over just so you don't poke your eye with it. And I'm just going to tuck that in up at the top there, which is a really handy little reminder so that I know where the top of the wreath is. Now, just to ring the changes in this pot, I put a bit of moss and some garden twine. So again, I'm going up with my wire through, then bring those wires up together, and then just add in a little extender wire in up at the top. And I'm going to put a loop wire in at the base just to make sure it anchors and stays exactly where I want. This is the fun part, it's the creative bit. But it's essential you make sure that everything you're putting in is really well secured. There's no great planning involved. It's a really lovely evolutionary creative process. So I think I've got as many pots in as I'd like, but I've got loads of other really lovely things to add in. I love using spices at this time of the year because the smell of them is just like mulled wine. It's wonderful. Again, little bundle mounted on a wire, and then I just use a little bit of ribbon just to disguise that wire. And I'm adding them in the same way as everything else. So that's the cinnamon in, and it smells gorgeous. I wish you could smell it, but look, doesn't it give a wonderful different texture? And now some dried orange slices, which smell like marmalade. So we need to make sure Paddington's nowhere near us. The oranges are in and it smells delicious. And the last thing is going to give it a gorgeous bow. Now, florists make beautiful bows, but we cheat. So we find the center point of the ribbon, gather it together, cinching, I think the Americans call it, and then we form a loop and we form another loop. Flipping it over so we get the lovely front side of the velvet, and again flipping it over. So you're basically forming a figure of 8 that continues up and down. Gather it together using a florist's wire just to anchor that with a twist. It looks a bit ugly, but don't worry because we're going to disguise that. So you take another thinner piece of ribbon and you just go in over where the wire is, onto the reverse, and then just tie it. Doesn't need to be particularly tight, and then you can manipulate those loops to form a really elegant, gorgeous bow that you then add in to your wreath. And the very, very last thing you're going to do is use one of these wires just to go through the frame on that reverse so that you can form yourself a nice, strong loop to hang it to your door. Et voila! There you will have a gorgeous festive wreath.